Maria spends 90 minutes every day fighting traffic just across 12 miles of Los Angeles, a commute that quietly drains $9,000 from her family each year. But here's the catch: this daily struggle isn't the result of bad luck or a personal choice. It's the direct legacy of a day in 1956, when Detroit held a farewell parade and ripped out more than 200 miles of streetcar track, signaling the deliberate start of America's public transit decline. Why are American cities failing at public transit, and how did choices made decades ago doom millions like Maria to endless gridlock? The answer hides a much bigger cost than you might realize. Every morning, Maria squeezes into her aging Honda and braces for the crawl. The freeway sign flashes red, accident ahead, so she inches forward, bumper to bumper, for 12 slow miles. By the time she parks near her office, she's spent nearly 40 minutes just getting there. That's on a good day. On bad days, it's closer to an hour. Then comes the return trip, another stretch of brake lights and frustration. In a city as vast as Los Angeles, this is simply what it takes to get to work. But the real cost isn't just measured in hours lost to traffic. Owning a car in LA quietly drains at least $9,000 from Maria's budget every year. Payments, insurance, gas, repairs, and parking fees that add up whether she's driving or stuck at a standstill. For Maria's family, that's more than the cost of food or health insurance. It's a second rent, paid not for a better home, but for the privilege of moving at the city's pace. There's no real alternative. The bus that serves her neighborhood runs once every 30 minutes, crawling through the same clogged streets. The nearest rail station is 2 bus rides away. So Maria stays in her car, paying in time, money, and money and stress. Multiply her story by millions, and the scale of the problem comes into focus. American transit isn't just inconvenient, it's a burden that shapes daily life, one commute at a time. On April 8, 1956, Detroit hosted a parade that looked more like a funeral procession than a celebration. Crowds lined Woodward Avenue to watch the city's last streetcar glide past, draped with black bunting and flanked by city officials waving from convertibles. For nearly a century, streetcars had stitched Detroit's neighborhoods together, over 200 miles of track, carrying shift workers, students, and families from riverfront to suburbs. But that morning, the tracks marked the end of an era. City leaders promised a bold new future, swapping electric streetcars for a fleet of shiny diesel buses. The move was pitched as progress, faster, more flexible, ready to serve a modern, car-loving metropolis. Behind the scenes, pressure from the auto industry was impossible to ignore. General Motors, headquartered just blocks away, had lobbied hard for the change. Local papers ran editorials hailing the city's embrace of the automobile, echoing the optimism of officials who believed buses would keep Detroit moving forward. Yet not everyone cheered. Operators who had spent decades behind the controls of the city's streetcars spoke of losing more than just a job. Riders, especially those who depended on late-night service, worried about longer waits and less reliable routes. One longtime passenger told a reporter, "We're not just losing a ride, it's a part of the city's soul we're tearing up." When the last streetcar rolled into the depot, workers began tearing up the rails the same afternoon. The city had made its choice. What looked like progress in 1956 would, in time, become a cautionary tale, one where convenience and industry interests took precedence over connection and community. A single bus stop in a typical American suburb is expected to serve more than 2 square miles of surrounding land. That's a sprawling patchwork of cul-de-sacs, strip malls, and parking lots. Hardly the dense core you find wrapped around metro stations in Paris or Tokyo. Instead of stepping out the door and catching a train, most riders here drive to a park and ride lot, leave their car, and hope their bus or train arrives on time. But with such a wide area to cover, routes stretch thin. The result is fewer stops, longer waits, and service that never quite feels convenient. This is where the so-called chicken and egg problem comes in. Low density means fewer riders per mile, so agencies run less frequent service. But infrequent service makes transit even less attractive, locking in car dependency. Even when the bus does show up, it's often stuck in the same traffic as everyone else. Without dedicated lanes, buses and light rail in the US face average schedule delays of 20 to 30%, meaning a trip that should take 20 minutes can easily drag on half an hour or more. In cities built for cars, public transit is set up to fail before it even starts. In 1971, Cobb County voters faced a choice: join Atlanta's new MARTA rail system or keep the county separate. The vote wasn't close. 60% said no. The official tally, 38,710 against, 25,767 in favor, meant the trains would stop at the county line, and millions of future riders would be left out. Campaign flyers warned of higher taxes, and painted MARTA as a burden for suburban taxpayers. but the messaging went further. Ads and mailers spoke of urban problems and outsiders, tapping into fears about crime and changing neighborhoods. Oral histories from the time recall warnings that MARTA would bring Atlanta's problems into Cobb, a not-so-subtle reference to the city's growing black population. Local officials insisted they were just protecting the budget, but the overlap between racial and fiscal arguments was impossible to miss. The result? MARTA's rail network was boxed in, unable to serve the region as a whole. Decades later, the lines still end abruptly at county borders, a physical reminder of how political boundaries and old fears can shape a city's future. Across the country, public transit is struggling to keep up with the scale of the need. Even after years of recovery, ridership has only climbed back to about 85% of what it was before the pandemic. In cities like Chicago, the numbers are even lower, hovering around 68%. Meanwhile, the infrastructure that millions rely on is crumbling under a $140 billion maintenance backlog. Trains break down, buses run late, and stations go years without repairs. For riders in places like South Dallas, the consequences are hard to ignore. When service is cut or delayed, it isn't just an inconvenience. It means missing work, losing wages, or being stranded miles from the nearest grocery store. The impact falls hardest on those with the fewest alternatives. Essential workers, seniors, and families who can't afford a car. And there's a bigger cost that stretches far beyond any one city. Transportation now accounts for 29% of the nation's greenhouse gas emissions, making it the single largest source. Every day that transit falls short, more cars fill the streets, and the climate crisis grows a little worse. The stakes are measured in lost opportunity, rising emissions, and the widening gap between those who can choose how they travel and those who can't. In the mid-1970s, Portland faced a crossroads. State and city leaders had long planned a massive new freeway, the Mount Hood, meant to slice through neighborhoods and speed suburban commuters downtown. But a coalition of civic activists, planners, and newly elected officials pushed back. They argued for a different future, one where public money would build connections, not divide communities. In 1974, Portland canceled the freeway, redirecting $50 million in federal highway funds to launch a light rail system instead. This decision didn't happen in a vacuum. Oregon's legislature had already created TriMet, a single regional transit authority with the power to coordinate service across city and suburb. At the same time, a new urban growth boundary kept sprawl in check, channeling development toward walkable neighborhoods around future rail stops. The first MAX line opened in 1986. Over time, ridership climbed to 38 million annual trips. The city's bet on integrated planning and unified governance didn't just build a train, it built a model for how American cities can choose transit over traffic and make it work. On April 8, 1956, Detroit removed over 200 miles of streetcar track, a turning point that marked a national shift toward car-centered cities. Decades of policy, like the Federal Highway Act of 1956, favored highway construction over transit investment, leading to sprawling suburbs and fragmented transit systems. Today, U.S. public transit serves just 7.7 billion trips annually, far behind cities like Paris and Tokyo. Chronic underfunding, political fragmentation, and design mismatches have left 85% of pre-pandemic riders returning, while a $140 billion maintenance backlog grows. Some questions remain, such as how new funding models will be implemented and whether regional coordination can overcome local resistance. But evidence from places like Portland proves that change is possible when cities redirect resources and reform governance. The record shows American transit decline was not inevitable, it was the result of choices. The future of public transit now depends on the decisions made from here.